In space, no one can hear you scream. Pity the same can't be said for a movie theatre. Hello everyone and welcome to Rewind Reviews. In this video I'm taking a look at one of the two horror movies that I have genuinely been looking forward to this year, and that is Alien Romulus. Released in 2024, the seventh entry in the sci-fi horror series follows a group of young space colonists who, while scavenging the deep ends of a derelict space station, come face to face with the most terrifying life form in the universe. Directed by Fede Alvarez, who co-writes alongside Rodo Sayeguz, the film stars Cailee Spaeny, David Johnson, Archie Reno, Isabella Merced, Spike Fern and Aileen Wu. This has been one of the most hyped up movies of the year so far, getting absolutely stellar reactions and reviews online and across social media, and I was definitely getting quite excited about seeing it. Alien, this franchise, has been a part of my life since long before I was even allowed to watch any of the films, and eventually when I was able to see these films, when I was old enough to actually watch them, I not only really enjoyed them, but I was able to see a lot of the influence that these films had on movies and TV shows that I had seen or had come across over the years. Obviously, I'm not a fan of every single entry in this franchise, but the first film from Ridley Scott, Aliens from James Cameron, and controversially, Prometheus, also from Ridley Scott, I love, and to me are the pillars of the franchise, with each instalment adding a different flavour. And I will say that does extend to the other three films as well, which took this franchise in a different direction and at least tried to do something different and unique with each instalment. And that is something that I do look forward to when it comes to each new entry in this franchise. And with this instalment, Alien Romulus, it looked like it was going to take the franchise back to its roots and focus on the horror angle once again, which was both an exciting prospect and a terrifying one. I think I've mentioned on this channel once before that I very rarely go and see horror movies at the cinema. I think the last one I did was Five Nights at Freddy's, and I was surprisingly quite okay with it. I don't even think I even jumped once. But I thought, you know what, I'm a big boy, I can handle this, so I decided to go and see this movie opening day in a packed theatre. And while, thankfully, it wasn't anywhere near as scary as it was being hyped up to be, it was still a really good film. Romulus picks up roughly 20 years after the events of Alien and follows a group of young space colonisers who want to escape from their homeworld, which is under the rule of the Wayland Corporation. And after searching for a way off-world, they discover a derelict spacecraft nearby that might contain what they need to escape. But upon investigation, it turns out that the ship is not as derelict as it appears, and the crew are forced to face off against a horde of facehuggers, chestbursters, and the perfect organism itself, the xenomorph. That story might sound quite familiar to long-time Alien fans. And it is. Alien Romulus does tread some very familiar ground. It does borrow some elements and plot points from previous films, but to be fair, there are some things that you do need to always do in an Alien film. But to be fair, this movie does add some new elements to the lore of the franchise and the xenomorphs themselves, which I don't think we've ever seen before. And even if it does repeat things from previous movies, it does try and add its own spin. The closest movie comparison that I can think of when it comes to this movie and this story and how everything is handled in this film is The Force Awakens. That movie did do a very similar thing by retreading a lot of ground from A New Hope, the original movie, and it features a lot of Easter eggs, references, a lot of callbacks to other movies in the franchise, but it does still try and do something a little bit different. So I can see, and I have seen, some people saying that they weren't happy about that, and that does appear to be one of the few criticisms that this movie is getting. For me, yes, I do understand that criticism, and I do kind of agree when it comes to recycled elements, but as I said, it is very hard not to do certain things in an Alien movie because not only are they expected, you do need those events to happen. And while this movie does have its fair share of Easter eggs and references, unlike The Force Awakens, I think they're handled quite well and quite subtly. There's even a really fun reference to Alien Isolation as well. They don't feel forced or out of the blue, and I do think that most of them are integrated into this quite well. Apart from one single line of dialogue which has gotten a bit of a mixed reaction, I don't mind it overall, but I think they could have built up to it a bit better. And I've got to admit, this movie does feel like it was made by fans. It feels like a fan film, albeit with a much, much bigger budget. It does feel like a love letter to the entire franchise, and you really do feel the love and passion that the people working on this movie have for this world. And while Romulus does have its connections to previous movies in this franchise that I don't think that casual viewers who aren't familiar with this franchise are going to understand, it does mostly stick to doing its own thing. It's a very self-contained, isolated story, so I do think that you can go into this movie and not know much about the franchise. But absolutely, long-time Alien fans will get a load more out of this. The biggest positive I can think of when it comes to this movie is the back-to-basics approach of this being a tense and suspenseful horror movie of this monster that is loose on this ship and the terrified people who are trapped there just trying to survive. Now, it's not quite as simple as that, but I did appreciate that this movie does go back to the horror roots of this this franchise, it is a horror movie first and foremost, and it does have a few splashes of action mixed in as well. And in terms of this being a horror movie, I do think that it is really good. It's very atmospheric, and I do think that how things are handled and the overall direction of it is very effective. And it definitely helps that director Fede Alvarez is pretty experienced when it comes to horror movies, having previously directed both Don't Breathe and the 2013 reboot of The Evil Dead, neither of which I've seen. I know I should, and I absolutely love the original Evil Dead movies from Sam Raimi and Ash vs. Evil Dead as well. I really enjoyed that series. Anyway, there's some really good and tense sequences. The suspense is dialed up across the entire movie, and yes, this film takes full advantage of some very well timed and very well executed jump scares, which I'll admit I wasn't looking forward to, but I was surprisingly resistant to them. There was only 2 sequences that made me flinch, but the rest of them didn't even faze me, unlike the couple that was sitting a few seats away from me. I felt the aisle shake. So yes, I was a little underwhelmed about how scary this movie actually did turn out to be, especially how scary people were making it out to be prior to its release. But that's not to say that this isn't any good, and I think it could genuinely be because I am so familiar with xenomorphs and this franchise in general. I think that newcomers who have never seen any Alien movie before will find this a lot scarier and a lot more unpredictable. To be fair, there are some very unsettling and actually kind of gross things that do happen in this. Isabella Merced was not lying, and that sense of dread and atmosphere just pins you to your seat. That's a really impressive thing to maintain over a 2-hour runtime, which I did think was the right length for this. But it also helps that each act focuses on something different, which stops it becoming repetitive, and it does help it stay fresh. I will say that when the film starts off, it is quite slow. I do think the overall pacing for the first half of the movie is quite slow and quite steady, but when it kicks off, it really picks up. And yes, the rumours of this really crazy third act are true. In my opinion, it's not as bonkers as it's been made out to be, but it is fun, it is creative, and it does add some new elements that some fans are going to be a bit split on. But even so, this is a very immersive film overall, and that's a combination of the amazing sound design, the look and the aesthetic, and the overall use of practical effects. The back to basics approach really pays off here, especially when it comes to how the facehuggers and the xenomorphs are brought to life. I thought they were just going to rely on suits once again to bring the xenomorphs to life, but apparently what it is that they did in this film, and I have seen some behind the scenes videos that actually does show this, that they did use a lot of animatronics and puppetry, and they look amazing. The detail that has gone into this design for the xenomorphs is excellent, and they look so much more terrifying than they have in a very long time, despite them not having that much screen time. Yes, there are some CG effects that are used throughout this, but they are used quite sparingly. For the most part, it does look fine, and it's only really used to help enhance a few elements here and there. Although there is one effect that they do use in this that has proven to be a bit controversial. Without going too much into spoilers, there's a character that appears in this that is partially CGI, and in terms of their look, it's a bit 50-50 for me. In certain angles and under certain light, they look great, but other times, not so much. It's not a deal breaker for me though. I didn't find it too distracting, but it definitely could have looked a bit better. Or they could have done something different and have a different character altogether. But as I said, because they prioritise practicality in this movie and they do try and do everything for real, it does help sell the immersion, especially when it comes to the environments and locations that the characters are in. Unlike the previous films, we do get to see a bit more of the main character's homeworld and what life is like under Weyland's control, and it really helps contribute to your understanding of the character's motivations and situation. Everything feels very lived in, it feels very run down, dark and grimy, especially the homeworld of these characters because it's a planet that doesn't even have sunlight. Visually, this does have a very dark look and tone to it, especially since the majority of the film takes place on the Romulus space station, which looks amazing. The use of lighting and shadows throughout this movie is excellent, and it really helps give this uneasy sense of claustrophobia, and you do find yourself glancing at the shadows every so often, especially if you know that the xenomorph is nearby. This is an amazing looking movie with some fantastic cinematography. Plus, I do appreciate that even though this movie does use a lot of shadows and it does feature a lot of dark imagery, you can still see everything. And there are some really creative sequences throughout this, some of which involve zero gravity. Those sequences are really impressive, and coming from somebody who doesn't suffer from motion sickness, I found some of those scenes quite dizzying. Honestly, the visuals, the production design, and the art direction as well, it all looks incredible. This is easily one of the best looking Alien films to date, and in my opinion, it's also got one of the best sound designs too. That is really good and used very effectively, knowing when to quieten down and how to balance all of the effects. I love that they keep this as scientifically accurate as possible, to the point where when the characters go out into space, it's just this massive vacuum, and the only thing that you can hear is just what sounds being picked up on their comms. Plus the sound effects that they use for the xenomorphs are absolutely perfect, especially when it's moving around. It sounds so much bigger and heavier this time around. It really emphasises just how powerful and scary this thing is. Honestly, on a technical level, apart from a few CG creations, it is pretty amazing, and I think that everyone has done a phenomenal job bringing the movie, this world and these creatures to life. When it comes to the performances and the characters, I was pleasantly surprised how good they all were. The actors are absolutely brilliant in their roles, and they play these characters really believably and realistic. The characters themselves are given a lot of focus early on in the film to help develop them, to help humanise them and give you a better understanding of who they all are. It's a lot like the first film, where it does take its time to get going, but in that build-up, in the first section of the film, it focuses on the characters and it helps you get to know them all before it all kicks off. So when you've got xenomorphs and facehuggers and all sorts running around, you do genuinely worry about them. They aren't treated like cannon fodder, and because it's such a small cast, it's such a small group of characters, you are able to get a lot more screen time with each of them. The standout performances for me are easily Cailee Spaeny as Rain and David Johnson as Andy. Kaylee's character Rain is essentially the Ripley of this movie, and she is excellent overall, and I love her character's development across the film. Again, it's stuff we have seen before in this series, but that doesn't make the character nor Kaylee's performance any less great. She's easy to empathise with, you do root for her, and yes, to reiterate, Cailee gives a brilliant performance and holds your attention. As for Andy, her brother, I thought he was phenomenal. David's performance, in my opinion, is the best out of the entire cast, and that's especially true because of how hard a role this one is to play. He's the latest android character that they've introduced in these films, but the writers do some very unique things with him that I certainly wasn't expecting, and it helps him stand out from the ones from the past films. I do think they should have called him something like Ethan or Elliot or something like that, something beginning with E, just to keep the android alphabet trend going. I mean, to be fair, Walter from Alien Covenant broke that streak, so oh well. David Johnson absolutely rises to the challenge of this role, portraying every aspect perfectly, and I loved where they go with the character. But as I said, everyone in this is fantastic. Isabella Merced, Archie Renu, Aileen Wu and Spike Fern, they all do fantastic work, portray these characters extremely well, and they all get a good few scenes each to shine. I also appreciate that the writers do try and sidestep a lot of the character cliches that you normally do find in a lot of modern horror movies, more so when it comes to the characters making decisions, because it would be so easy to make the characters just idiots so that they make a load of stupid mistakes. Bar like one moment, they don't really do that in this. Their decisions and actions are thought out or made purely out of panic or desperation, and I really did like that. You don't spend the entire movie going, no, don't go in there, don't do that, what are you doing, why are you doing this, or anything like that. I really appreciated all the work that went into developing these characters, and I did genuinely think that they were all really good. And finally, the soundtrack from composer Benjamin Wallfish, I really liked overall. It does have a very similar vibe and sound to the soundtrack from the original Alien, and it does maintain the classical orchestra as well. It's quite a subtle soundtrack overall, but it helps build up the tension and suspense just like a lot of modern horror movies do. Plus, it does mix together sounds and instruments that do evoke things from science fiction that sounds very futuristic and quite mysterious as well. In my opinion, it's not an amazing soundtrack, but it is good. It fits the tone, it enhances the horror, and it is utilised well. And it also features a few callbacks to older themes as well, which was a nice touch. So overall, I do think that it was a good soundtrack and it does fit this movie. Overall, this is a brilliant return to horrific form and a welcomed addition to the series. Yes, Romulus does tread some very familiar territory. It features a few elements and callbacks that don't quite work as well as I think they could have, and some of the CG effects should definitely have looked a lot better. But that being said, the tone, the visuals and cinematography, the soundtrack, the sound design, practical effects, puppetry, animatronics, the sets and set design, the characters and the actors' performances are fantastic. This is easily one of the best Alien films so far. It's an excellent and genuinely unsettling horror movie with a good tense atmosphere, and I couldn't be happier with how it turned out. I'd highly recommend giving this film a look if you can, especially on the big screen. If you're a fan of the Alien series, this is an absolute must watch, and I don't think you'll be disappointed. Casual viewers might not understand everything, especially if you haven't seen any of the other films, but I don't think that's a negative, as I think that will make it a lot scarier and unpredictable for you. This is absolutely one of the better movies I have seen this year. It gives you what you want and it delivers even more than expected. I really enjoyed this, and yes, while I didn't find it as scary as it had been made out to be, I did have a great experience and I can't wait to see it again. So with all that being said, my rating for Alien Romulus is an 8 out of 10. For the people who still have reservations about Disney taking over these franchises like Alien, like Predator, like Planet of the Apes, I think they are in good hands. Alien, Romulus, Prey, Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes are all excellent movies, and I could not be happier with how they all turned out. I really enjoyed this movie, and I'm really hopeful to see more in the future, including that TV series as well. I really hope that's good, but until then, we'll wait and see. Well, I think that is pretty much everything I want to say for this video, so if you have watched this video, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoy this content, please like, subscribe, and be sure to hit that notification button. If you have seen Alien Romulus, let me know down in the comments what you think about it and which movie in the franchise is your favourite. Plus, if you have any suggestions for any future Rewind reviews you would like to see me do, let me know down below. But until next time, thank you very much for watching, and I shall see you in the next video. See you guys.